When you look at different ERP selection types, they vary a lot. Some companies focus on just the checklist based approach. The other companies may perform the entire business transformation. So, which are the top 10 ERP selection types in 2023? That's exactly what we are going to discuss in this video. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam Gupta. I am principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. We help our clients with the ERP selection, digital transformation strategy, roadmap development, as well as ERP implementation. On that note, let's get back to today's topic, which is going to be the top 10 ERP selection types in 2023. Now, when we look at these selection types, there are going to be many different companies. Some companies simply look at just the ERP. Now, ERP could mean a lot of different things when you look at different industries. Sometimes it is going to be the entire enterprise architecture because you have to develop the integration flows. But the accounting firms or the functional consulting firms, they might not have as deep technical expertise. So they are simply going to look at this from the lenses of just the accounting software or the ERP software. So there are many different selection types. And if you are in the market for ERP selection, you need to know how these types differ to be able to compare different providers. So now let's review the list. Number one on our list is change focused business transformation driven selection. And in this particular case, what companies are going to do is number one, they have to develop the process flows. And that is going to be not only from the user perspective, but also from the system implementation perspective. And typically, this is going to be a very involved process. When you are going to develop these process workflows, you are sort of developing a language that they can follow along. And if you develop this for the as is workflows, then they will be able to understand what to be workflows are, because if you are simply going to review this inside the system or simply going to describe the capabilities, then they might make decisions that they may not fully understand. So you need to be really careful there. Now, the pros of the change focused business transformation driven selection is going to be much higher chances of getting business results from the technology investment. And the reason for that is because the users are involved. You have tailored the workflows from their perspective. So they have complete understanding of how these flows are going to impact their business operations. They are going to appreciate why you are making certain decisions. And typically, when you look at the business transformation implementation, in this particular case, you need to change your data, you need to change your processes, and that could have major impact into your operations. Sometimes you need to change the way you might be packing your goods or the way you might be shipping your goods, or you may need to change your SKU numbers that might go on your packaging. So there's going to be massive changes to your organization. Now, sometimes the team might be okay in doing that. Sometimes there might be legitimate concern that you need to pay attention to. So again, unless you involve them, you will not know what the real concerns are, and you might make decisions without involving them that could fire back. Now, the other pros for this particular selection type is going to be most of the organizations, especially the users, they don't necessarily have visibility into other departments. Sometimes their decision making is going to be from their perspective. They don't really understand how their decision making is going to impact others. So when you involve all of these stakeholders as part of your selection process, then they will understand how the decisions are going to impact organization wide, and why you as the executive team are making these decisions for them. So you are going to have happy users. The adoption is going to be higher just because they are going to own the solution. Now, the other pros for this particular approach is the lower technical and financial risk during the implementation phase. And the reason for that is because you have done the due diligence. If you are not going to do the change focused business transformation, then in most cases, you are not spending as much time during the selection phase. And you might have surprises during the implementation phase just because the kind of decisions that you have made that may not be compliant with the constraints of the new system that you have recently signed. So that's why spending time with these discovery workflows is super critical. Now, the cons of this approach is going to be because it's a long process and you have to invest not only from the perspective of the internal teams, but also the consulting time. And that could come across as slightly more expensive. Now, the second cons of this particular selection type is going to be the selection phase might take longer, and sometimes the champions might be discouraged in going for the implementation, or the whole project might be killed. So there's going to be a little balancing act in terms of how long do you want to do this and how deep you want to go in the discovery process. Now, the number 3 con of this is going to be requires commitment from the top. It cannot be done at the department level. So that's the critical point. So that's number 1. Now, number 2 on our list is business transformation driven selection. Now, the difference between your change focused business transformation driven selection versus business transformation driven selection is that you are looking from the lenses of a business problem. So you are trying to solve a business problem. You might not document the workflows from the user perspective. In this particular case, you are going to have business problems such as you are trying to reduce your scrap rate. So you will do the KPIs, the success factors, or the selection, but you are not necessarily looking at this from the user perspective. So that's a real difference between number 1 and number 2. Now, the pros for this particular selection type is going to be less expensive than the change focused business transformation due to the reduced time for your user centric processes. Now, the number 2 pro for this particular approach is going to be the shorter implementation time than change focused transformation, just because you are saving time with the user centric workflows. Now, number 3 is going to be focus on the business drivers, ensures alignment of business goals with the technical implementation. So this one is still better because you are still able to focus on the business drivers and you are able to align this with technical implementation. So you are not going to have as many risks during the implementation phase. So this is slightly better. But again, the user involvement and the user process are not there. So that could be a risk. Now, the cons for this particular selection type is going to be the users might not accept the system, leading to data or process silos. From the user perspective, just because they are not really involved, they might hijack the processes, they might hijack the data just because they don't fully understand. So that's going to be a risk. Now, longer selection phase than the functional ERP selection. So most common type ERP selection is the functional ERP selection, where you are simply selecting based on a checklist. That's how most selection consulting firms approach the ERP selection. So it's going to be slightly longer than that, just because you are doing the business transformation analysis. You are trying to change the business drivers and the processes as well as data, and you are trying to align this with the KPI analysis that you have done. So that does require a little bit of time, as opposed to doing this only for the ERP and simply following the checklist approach. Now, the other con for this particular selection type is going to be longer selection phase. The third one is requires commitment from the top. And this is the similar on as your change focus transformation. So there's a similar, so you need to make sure that the leadership is really aligned. Even with this, if they are not aligned, if this is really the department level initiative, this might not even be possible. So that's number 2. Now, number 3 on our list is the enterprise architecture replatform driven selection. The difference between 1, 2, and 3 is going to be this is slightly more IT driven, where the IT teams are looking at this as the holistic transformation initiative. So they are combining all the systems that you might have in the architecture. It could be your ERP, e-commerce, it could be WMS, TMS, MES, whatever you have in your architecture. So typically IT teams, CIO are going to lead this particular selection just because they are worried about the enterprise architecture. So you are going to have the comprehensive alignment from the IT perspective, but that is not going to be aligned from the business process or business process re-engineering perspective, or data engineering re-engineering may not be possible, just because the IT teams might struggle to involve the business users, or they might struggle to communicate why the data changes or the process changes are necessary to simplify the architecture. So in this particular case, the pros are going to be the technical issues such as master data governance may not be a problem because IT has dealt with it, at least from the technical standpoint or from the architecture standpoint. That's probably not going to be a problem. The other pro for this particular approach is the shorter implementation time than business transformation centric initiatives, just because you are not investing as much time with the process re-engineering, data re-engineering. That's why this is going to be slightly shorter than the other two that we have already discussed. The other pro for this one is going to be time savings for business, just because business is not really investing as much time, so you are going to save some time there. Now the con for this selection type is the adoption issues, just because this particular selection type is done more from the technical standpoint, so users might not be able to accept it. Now, number two con for this particular selection type is going to be the longer selection phase than the functional ERP selection. So this particular selection type is still longer, just because in this case, you might replace not just the ERP, but you might be replacing some of the other components as well, depending upon the architectural challenges, depending upon how the entire architecture is built out. So sometimes it would be ERP e-commerce, sometimes ERP WMS, but there are going to be multiple components that are going to be impacted, and you are planning for them comprehensively. Now, the other con for this one is the systems might be substantially over engineered because of the missing process and data re-engineering step. So since this is attacked more from the technical standpoint, sometimes they might assume the broken processes or broken data, and they might take them as the requirement, and they are simply going to model them technically inside the system. And because of that, there is going to be over engineering. You might have performance issues, you might have adoption issues because of all of these problems. So that's number three. Now, number four on our list is the functional checklist approach. And this is probably the most common type of the ERP selection that you are going to see in the market. This is what most ERP selection consulting firms do, especially if they are not going to have as deep background with the implementation. Even the companies who might claim to be involved during the implementation, the only thing they do is the project management. They don't necessarily have as much ERP implementation expertise. So their perspective is going to be very functional checklist centric. They are not looking at this more from the enterprise architecture perspective, more from the business transactions perspective. So the pros of this particular approach is going to be that it's cheaper. Then the second pro is going to be it's faster, and that's why the time would vary when you are going to look at many different selection consulting firms. They are going to have different timelines, they are going to quote different budget. So sometimes it might be harder to compare, but this one is definitely going to be faster as well as cheaper. This one can be done at the department level, and for the most part, this is led by either CFO or the finance executives. And the reason for that is because they feel that ERP is going to be just the accounting sort of system, and that's why they might attack at only the department level, and they might not even worry about the integration or the master data governance. Once the ERP selected, then their assumption is going to be that the technical teams that they are going to hire, they are going to figure out the integration as well as master data governance plan. And that could fire back, because once you sign the contract, then you are living with the constraints of the systems that you have chosen, and then you are trying to solve problems only based on that. And sometimes the problems can be easier if you had done this in the pre-selection phase. So the cons of this particular approach is going to be substantial technical debt and the higher cost in the long term. And the reason for that is because when you have already selected and your perspective is going to be limited just based on the ERP system, you have not planned any of the integration, at least some planning, some basic level of planning for all of those integration in terms of what fields are you going to map, what is going to be the roles and responsibilities of each of the systems. And if you are not doing that, then you might end up over integrating, over engineering the integrations, and that could fire back. Now, the number two con for this particular case is going to be increased work for operational teams in reconciling different data silos as well as the integration issues. Now, when you are not necessarily designing the reconciliation workflows, for example, let's say if you have felt that, you know what, I am going to simplify my ERP processes, or I'm going to simplify my e-commerce processes just because the customer experience is going to be better. So that could be one argument, but then you have not analyzed by simplifying the front end experience how much work you are adding to the backend. So the benefits that you are going to get from the front end process cannot really justify the amount of work that you are putting in from the backend, and that's why you need to really analyze this in the selection process, design those reconciliation workflows. By simplifying something, by streamlining something, are you increasing the workload for the other teams? Now, number three is going to be higher chances of implementation failure even after investing in the selection phase. And this is very common just because sometimes when you are going to be purely looking from the ERP lenses and you have not really planned your integration as well as the enterprise architecture, this could result into implementation failure. So that's number four. Now, number five on our list is accounting or fractional CFO firms led. And these selection types are very common because the majority of the accounting firms nowadays are doing the selection because you may have hired them from the audit purposes, or you may have hired them for taxation. So obviously you are going to rely on their advice. Now, most of the accounting firms that we have in the market, their business model is very similar to resellers, where they are trying to sell only a couple of solutions. So their selection process is going to be biased. They might not be going through as many selections, and they might not be updated with the ERP industry. And for the most part, when you are looking for the discounts on your contract, or when you are looking at the architectural challenges, you really need to understand these things more from the M&A perspective. You need to be updated with the industry. So the more cycles that you are going to have under your belt, the superior your selection process is going to be. And in this particular case, the accounting and fractional CFO firms, they are going to be looking at this only from the lenses of the finance and accounting, and the other teams might not appreciate that, or they might not completely buy the decisions, and because of that you are going to have fractions in the team. Now, the pros of this particular approach is going to be it's cheaper, it's probably going to be faster, and can be done at the department level, very similar to your functional checklist approach. Now, the cons for this particular selection type is going to be biased selection approach towards their IP revenue and the solutions of their familiarity. This is a very common problem, with this particular selection type, if this is going to be led by the accounting or the fractional CFO firms. Now, number two con for this particular selection type is going to be increased admin work in reconciling different ledgers, just because they are not really analyzing it at the enterprise architecture level where your master data is going to reside. They are not really designing the process boundaries for different systems. So that's why it is probably going to result in the increased reconciliation of different ledgers. If those ledgers might not reside, let's say, in the ERP system, the operational teams may not agree to keep those ledgers inside the ERP system. So the accounting or the fractional CFO firms, they are only going to be worried about the general ledger, but then if the subledgers are not really planned as part of the enterprise architecture, there are going to be issues with the selection. Now, number three, the con that we have is higher chances of implementation failure even after investing in the selection phase, and this is a very similar problem as your functional checklist. So that's number five. Now, number six on our list is business or technology consultants led. These are going to be either lean consulting firm or supply chain consulting firm. You might have a relationship with them and you might ask them to perform your ERP selection as well. ERP is a very different beast. It requires very different expertise in general. So if you are going to ask them, number one, they are not doing it on a daily basis. They might not understand the ERP industry politics. They might not keep track of the industry on a daily basis. Their selection process is also going to be biased because some of these companies may have the reseller agreement with a lot of different vendors in the market. They might be familiar with only few solutions, just like your accounting or fractional CFO firms. So their selection process is probably going to be biased. Now, pros for this particular selection type is that it's going to be cheaper, faster, can be done at the department level as well. In most cases, these companies are going to be engaged at the department level. They might be marketing agencies or they might be IT companies, so depending upon who is hiring them, they are probably going to be leading the selection. So that's why this can be done at the department level. Now, the cons for this particular selection type is that their selection process is most likely going to be biased towards the solution, either even if they are not biased from the compensation perspective, it might be biased because of their familiarity with only these solutions. Now, number two con is that might drive substantial process overhead because of the increased work in reconciling different ledgers. And this is a very similar problem as accounting CFO firm. Here, the perspective is slightly different. They might not be looking at this from the lenses of finance accounting. They might be looking at this more from the lean perspective, manufacturing, supply chain, depending upon what their bias is, what their background is, and that could drive very similar problems as you are going to see. Let's say if the selection is going to be led by your accounting CFO firm. Now, higher chances of implementation failure, even in this particular case, just because their selection process is going to be biased, the architecture is going to be biased, and because of that, you might run into issues. So that's number 6. Now, number 7 on our list is very interesting. So this is resellers flag. And in this particular case, some of the resellers of the solution, they are going to claim that they have the ERP selection expertise. But for the most part, the only reason why they are investing their time or they are helping, sometimes they might offer the selection services for free, is because they are trying to sell their solution. Sometimes these resellers might gang up with the other resellers. So they might position that they can help you evaluate many different solutions in the market, even if that solution may not be as part of their portfolio. So they are simply going to gang up, and that's what they are doing with every single deal. Sometimes this particular reseller is going to win, sometimes the other reseller is going to win. So they are really trying to game the system. And because of that, obviously, their perspective is going to be biased. Their effort is going to be that the solutions in their portfolio, they are simply going to highlight their strengths and most likely not going to include the solutions that are going to be either stronger than their solutions or they're simply going to undermine their strengths. So that's going to be their approach. So in this particular case, watch out for the resellers, look for the relationships in the market, the kind of relationships that they have, look for their content strategy. If they only talk about one solution, they don't talk about multiple solutions, most likely they are probably going to be biased. Now, the pros in this particular approach is going to be, it might be free, it may be faster, can be done at the department level, very similar pros as your accounting fractional CFO firms led. The con for this particular approach is going to be the misguided selection process. Now, number 2 is higher chances of ERP implementation failure due to selecting a system that might not be a fit. The reason for that, even if they are being completely genuine, they are going to know only that system. They might not understand any other systems. And because of that, they might be overcommitting without even knowing that they are overcommitting. And that's why this might result in the ERP implementation failure. Now, the biased architecture may result in substantial operational efficiencies. So when you are going to talk to either ERP vendor, WMS vendor, TMS vendor, it doesn't matter who you are talking to, but each of them are going to be biased to their solution. And sometimes there is nothing fundamentally wrong about that because each of the systems are probably going to be doing many different things and there's going to be significant overlap in terms of what these systems can do. But just because a system can do something, it does not mean that it's going to be the most efficient use of that system in your architecture. If they are going to be overcommitting the capability of any specific solution, it might slow down your operations. It might be slower in the efficiency. So you really need to pay attention to that. So that's number 7. Now, number 8 on our list is freelance consultant led. And there are a lot of freelancers, especially executives in the market. And sometimes these executives may be in transition in between jobs. And the ERP selection is probably going to be the easiest offering that most executives can attack just because they may have done this a couple of times. They might feel that, you know what, I can probably handle ERP selection, maybe project management. And that's why you are going to find a lot of companies in the ERP market. So in this particular case as well, just because these executives may have implemented only a couple of solutions and each of these solutions are really designed for very specific micro industry transaction, their perspective is going to be very biased to their success. Just because an ERP solution has been successful in one particular situation, it does not mean that it will be successful in your situation, because your business model could be different, your transactions are likely to be different. So it's a very different context. It requires deeper analysis to understand how different your business transactions, how different your business model is. Even if you might be part of the same industry, there could be differences in terms of the transactions. And again, if you don't analyze this, and if you simply select, okay, I was successful in last two companies based on this particular ERP solution, so I feel very confident in going for this particular solution. Now, if you do that, that might fire back, just because the solution may not be optimized for the transaction types for the new business. And that's very common with these freelance consultants led selection. So their perspective is likely to be biased to their familiarity. Also, they might have the relationship in the market. They might receive kickbacks from the companies. So they might be biased there as well. So the pros for this particular approach is going to be, they might be free, just because the consultants might be trying to either find a deal, or they might be selling their offering, and because of that they might be offering this particular service for free. It might be faster, can be done at the department level. The cons for this particular approach is going to be, the misguided selection process leans toward consultants' expertise with few systems. The other con for this is going to be higher chances of ERP implementation failure due to selecting a system not fit. Number 3, biased architecture may result in substantial operational inefficiencies. So that's number 8. Now, number 9 on our list is affiliate marketing company led. And affiliate marketing company, these are really the marketplaces or the marketing companies. For them, ERP selection is all about going through a checklist, and they all have access to these checklists. And typically these affiliate marketing companies are going to be, for example, you have G2, you have Capterra, you have Software Connect, and their role in the ecosystem is to get a lead and get paid by the software vendors. They are really trying to sell the leads. They are not really expert of the ERP systems. They don't implement ERP systems on a daily basis. So they are not qualified to do any sort of ERP selection. But there are companies that are really affiliate marketing companies, and they might advise you to select the ERP, but for the most part, they are going to be doing this at a very high level, where they are going to be looking at pricing, maybe licensing, maybe based on number of users. So whatever information the marketing teams are going to provide from the software perspective, they are looking at only those variables. So the pros of this particular approach is going to be, it might be free just because they are offering the free services for you, but the selection that they are claiming, it's not a real ERP selection. The other pros for this particular approach is going to be easy way of shortlisting potential solutions. So obviously they can help you in shortlisting some of these solutions, but again, sometimes you might have the false positives, false negatives, so you need to be careful with that. Now, number 3 is a centralized place to learn about various solutions in the market, just because they typically rank higher on the ranking. So you probably will land, if you are searching on Google for the ERP selection advice, those sites are the first ones that you are going to get in the market. But again, they are not expert, or they are not implementing the ERP, and they might not have any experience implementing an ERP. So they are not going to know all the issues that they need to dig into during the selection phase. Now, the cons for this particular approach is going to be, their recommendation might mislead your ERP selection. So number 2 is no technical or functional expertise to be informed with recommendation. They are only looking at maybe 20, 30, 40 variables. Typically, they are going to be part of the marketing brochures, and that's how they are selecting the ERP. So obviously, the selection process is not going to be very informed. Now, number 3 is not really an ERP selection, even though they might claim that it is an ERP selection, but it's not really ERP selection. ERP selection in general, if you are going to be hiring any of the independent ERP consultants, their approach is going to be far deeper. They are typically looking at the architectural issues, the technical issues, the contractual issues, the legal issues. So their approach is far deeper. So that's number 9. Number 10 is internally managed. And internally managed is very interesting as well. Sometimes companies hire interns, sometimes they are going to hire ex-executives, sometimes they are going to try this internally. Now, the challenge with internally managed ERP selection will be that Number one, you may spend months and months and months, and you might not make any progress just because the team that might be managing this internally may not get traction from the other teams. Number two, they are probably not going to have a framework that they can follow, that can be trusted, that other team members can trust. Number three, you are going to have some sort of power struggle in this particular case, because the department that might be leading the selection, if they are too powered, then obviously the selection is going to be biased from their perspective. And if they are not as powerful, then some other departments are probably going to hijack this in their direction. So now the pros of the internally managed ERP selection is going to be the perception of it being cheaper. Even though it might come across as it being cheaper, it might take longer during the selection phase itself. The requirements that you are going to analyze might not be at a level where technical teams can really utilize them as the user stories. So you are going to spend a lot of time, not just the internal time as well as external time, because whatever you have done, they might have to not only undo whatever you have done, but they have to do more. So even though it has the perception of it being cheaper, but it might be more expensive overall. The number two issue that we have is might be easier to coordinate with the internal teams. And number three, it can be done at the department level. Even this one is possible at the department level. The con for this particular approach is the internal team might take forever due to the missing framework. And even if they are able to do something around this, their requirements are probably going to be vague. They are not going to be as specific. They might miss out on the issues just because they are not keeping track of the ERP industry on a daily basis. They might not understand the politics, so you are going to have all of those issues. Now, the powerful forces might shut down other departments, leading to biased selection process. Number three is sweeping assumptions might drive much higher licensing fee and over-engineered system. So even if you are thinking that you are going to save a lot of money, but you might lose a lot just because either the implementation is not going to work or the users might not adopt. So that's it for this list. So this was the list for different ERP selection types for 2023. If you like this content, we publish these videos on a weekly basis. So hit the subscribe button on YouTube. It is also available in the audio form on the podcast WBS Rocks. So check on Google, Apple, as well as Spotify. If you have not checked our digital transformation report for 2023, we are going to include the link of that. Also, you are going to find a detailed article in the description. So if you would like to get more details, check that out. On that note, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.